this sort of idea that, you can't do well and do good, that you have to somehow make a choice between, making a difference and making a profit. Those ideas are so deeply, deeply ingrained in how we teach business in business schools,
Right.
How courts of law make decisions, how society views like the proper role of, what do CEOs and leaders do, right?
Yeah.
It's so deeply ingrained. You have to sort of think about how do you teach that in a way that people can sort of break through those assumptions.
Yeah. You're listening to Granite Goodness, the podcast where we interview New Hampshire people making the world a better place.
Oh, Susie, where are you going now?
My name is Andy DeMeo. Today, I'm speaking to my friend and mentor, Fiona Wilson. Fiona is the Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer and Director at the University of New Hampshire Sustainability Institute, where she helps embed sustainability into the experiences and curriculum of students. We talk about business culture, higher education, the 1980s, Reaganism, Thatcherism, stakeholder capitalism, doing well while doing good, sailing, marketing German beer, and a bunch of other stuff I hope you enjoy on this episode of Granite Goodness. We are here today with Fiona Wilson. Fiona, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. I'm excited to be on the Granite Goodness podcast.
Why is that?
Why is that? That's a good question. Well, I've always been a fan of you, Andy, as you know. Ever since you showed up in my class as a first year student here at UNH.
Bushy-tailed and bright-eyed.
Yeah, and
years ago.
Yeah. Well, the very first thing you said in class, I think, was like, "I'm here for the orangutans," which was, for a class on business. It's like, interesting. Tell me more about that. Right. So, I knew right away that you were somebody that really cared about, this planet and making things better. And
Sure.
When I think, I'm a radical optimist. I think you're a pretty radical optimist. You've done lots of cool things. And so when you told me you were putting this podcast together, I was like, okay, I'm in.
Well, that's actually why we're here today, is because of the orangutans. It all comes back. We first met years ago, would have been in, I think, the spring of 2014, which is crazy. I took your class. I had just transferred to UNH, and I took your class, Business for People, Planet, and Profits. And I met you, and that class changed maybe the course of my whole life, you could say, for a bunch of reasons, but we're here to talk about you and not me. And I was really excited to have you on. I mean, when I first thought of doing this, you, like top of my head person I want to have on, talk to, get out there, because I honestly don't think that you can think about or talk about sustainability, let alone, solving complex problems, which, we as fellow sustainability enthusiasts could construe everything as sustainability, right? You can't talk about sustainability in New Hampshire, here in the Granite State, without talking about Fiona Wilson. You can't do it. She's making a face right now, but, she's just being humble. Fiona has, I don't even have the words, like to sum up all the things that you have done. But maybe for the audience, could you give kind of the boilerplate description of, who you are, what you do here, and I'm going to butter you up for the rest of the pod because I think you're
No,
great.
you don't need to do that. But, right now I'm the director of the Sustainability Institute here at the University of New Hampshire, and I'm also the university's Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer, although on July 1 of this year, 2024, I'll become the Chief Sustainability Officer for UNH.
Congratulations.
Yeah, my colleague and the founding executive director, Dr. Tom Kelly, he's been here about 26 years. He started this amazing work over a quarter of a century ago.
Right.
So he's starting a phased step down to retirement, and I'm really honored and excited that the university has asked me to step into his very, very big shoes.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the perfect. I don't know who else could do it.
Well, thank you.
Honestly.
I'm honored. I'm excited. It's going to be amazing.
Gosh. So you have done it all, you could say, in the world of, higher education. You're a professor, you're a creator and a facilitator of, so many different programs that, students get a ton of value out of and really enjoy. And I'm biased, but I also think there's a very good rational argument for why they're incredible programs, being an alumnus of them and loving them. But I have to disclose that. Why education? Tell me about that, because you've had a really interesting career. I remember when I first met you as a professor, this was your pitch to us, for combining, business and people, planet, profits. You said something along the lines of, I have worked in the business sector and I've worked in the nonprofit sector, and there were really great things about both of them. But there was something I've always wanted to see if there was kind of a third way where we could find a little more of, I don't know if values is the right word, but tell me about that. How would you pitch that today? Has that changed? Tell me.
Yeah, like when I was leaving school, right? I didn't have. I was first generation in my family to have college education. I didn't have a family where I had a bunch of role models. My dad was an engineer. And that was definitely not something I was interested in doing.
Sure.
And, I didn't have a lot of other role models to look at and say, well, I want to do that, right? And so my first career move, out of school was, kind of random.
Yeah.
I often tell the story, like in those olden days when, I was leaving school, we didn't really have computers. And so our career library, our career database was like this little room that had these little drawers, and they were drawers of index cards, and it was like A through Z. And, each card had a different career on it, right?
No, are you kidding?
No, I'm not kidding at all.
And this is in the UK?
This is in the United Kingdom, yeah.
In the Thatcherite?
Yeah, absolutely. In the
Thatcherite
Thatcherite era, yeah. And, I always just say to people, like, luckily I decided to start with A, right? And I opened the drawer and advertising. That sounds pretty exciting. I could have started at Z and been a zoologist,
right.
But, I just randomly opened this drawer and thought, advertising, that sounds like a pretty interesting career. It's about psychology and, human... sort of human behavior, consumer behavior, it's about working with people, it's about creativity and innovation. And so, my very first job was in advertising. And I was really lucky. I got, I actually was talking to somebody about this at lunchtime. I just stumbled into this fantastic company called Ogilvy and Mather. It's one of the largest, most respected advertising agency networks in the world, I just stumbled into it,
right.
Just super lucky. But I got to work on the advertising and marketing for some big brands like Guinness Beer and Reebok and American Express, and there was lots as you remember me telling you back on that first class, right? There was lots I loved about that, particularly as a young person working in that very collaborative, very team-oriented, very creative environment. But as I got older, I started to sort of have questions about, so what value am I actually creating in the world? Right. So started to have some pause on, what's the value of business, and how does this sort of capitalist system that we operate in, how is that creating kind of value in the world?
Right. Yeah. Am I just making ads for beer, and is that it? Or
am I helping Guinness sell X million pints more X million pints more beer every year? That's great, but and so what, right? I think perhaps like a lot of us, I started to ask those kind of so what questions.
And that led you
so that led me to I had a little flirtation with the sort of nonprofit and public sector. 1 year in the public sector, I'm glad I tried it. Very clearly not for me.
Back to selling beer.
No, and then and then really sort of nonprofit sector, right? So I'm like, all right, so maybe it's the nonprofit sector. And I had had a cool experience working for a nonprofit, doing sort of marketing and fundraising for a nonprofit. And there was a lot I loved about that too, right?
Yeah.
Really loved the kind of the mission orientation of that, and very clearly how you're helping people,
Right.
particularly, right? But I missed some of the creativity and the sort of pace and the kind of the effectiveness and efficiency of the business world. And
Right.
so that's when I went back and got an MBA, I was lucky enough to do an MBA at a business school that was really focused on sort of the role that business plays in society.
Okay.
So that started me asking those questions. Ended up, coming out of my MBA program at a time when the internet was just getting started. So this was
Right.
like in the late 1990s.
So you got some early memes.
I got some, yeah.
We were having a conversation about, memes a couple minutes ago, and you can outclass us all.
Probably.
I'm sure.
Probably.
Remember Ask Jeeves? Well, I don't want to talk about it. So
yeah.
early internet. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was so, so I had all these ideas about how could I really use business kind of, as a force for good in the world. But then I kind of, came out of my MBA, got recruited by an internet company, and I have no regrets about that at
Right.
all. It was an incredible experience. It was kind of wild and crazy and wonderful and awful all at the same time. But I definitely came out of that experience saying, I really want to think now.
Yeah.
By that point, I was kind of in my early 30s and just really wanted to think about how do I really reconcile these sort of two parts of my life and my brain, which is, I do believe in the capitalist system.
Right.
It does all kinds of good things. It helps us get, life-changing goods and services. It helps lift people out of poverty. But there are problems with it, right? And
Right.
we need to sort of resolve some of those issues. And so that's when I decided to go back and get a PhD, and really that's when I started my academic career.
Sure.
Yeah.
What did that landscape look like at that time? Were a lot of other people thinking, or did you, try and find a program and you couldn't quite find someone who was on your bandwidth thinking of how to combine that? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, well, I was super lucky. So I did my doctoral work at Boston University.
Okay.
And I got to study under a guy called Dr. Jim Post. And Jim Post is really one of the people who is one of like a small handful of people who really led the charge to be sort of the anti-Milton Friedman. So for anybody
Sure.
that knows much about economics,
Yeah.
kind of our what we might call shareholder capitalism today.
Yeah.
That was really, defined and led by the economist Milton Friedman. But at the same time that he was sort of putting out those ideas about like what was proper capitalism, proper sort of business that really has shaped our economy over the last 50 years, there was also this group of people, Dr. Jim Post was one of them, who was really kind of offering a different sort of perspective, which is what we now call stakeholder theory.
Right.
So I was lucky enough to study under Jim, and so really found somebody I could really look up to and admire and work with. But there weren't a lot of other academics. It was considered pretty fringy, even even in sort of 2008, 2009, kind of these ideas about business can be more than just about a single financial bottom line. That was still considered in the academic circles pretty fringy.
Right.
There was certainly people thinking about what we called at the time corporate social responsibility.
Yeah.
And it was just when the B Corp movement was starting to kind of come onto the scene. So I was lucky that I could sort of, really anchor the research I did as a doctoral student in the emergence of the B Corp movement.
Yeah.
Just a year or two into, when that had started.
Sure. What I find interesting, this is so cool too, because I've never talked to you personally about all this stuff. I'm learning so much about you, that you ended up in this space, at this age, at this time in your life. I kind of think it is interesting to point out that you grew up and had some of your education and formative experiences around business and education and just kind of the world in Thatcherite Britain and Reagan America, and when these ideas about business were kind of the gospel, shareholder value and all that. And I guess you could call it like the questioning of of that approach seemed to come to you naturally. Would you find yourself having conversations with, I don't know, other employees, like you finish an ad for Guinness and you turn to your coworker and you say, is this it? Is there anything else? Or was this kind of a thing that you'd keep to yourself and that you didn't really talk about?
That's a great question.
So you found your PhD
That's a great
program.
question, yeah.
Because people talk a lot about, the influence of Thatcher and Reagan on business and capitalism and stuff. And this is something you know a ton about. It's fascinating.
Yeah, they weren't conversations I was having with my co-workers back then. I mean, these were times of great economic abundance, right? So people weren't really asking those questions. It was like, this is the good life, right?
Why? What's the problem?
I think it was just, maybe other people were having the same questions I was, they just weren't voicing them. But I certainly, was sort of keeping them more to myself. That's why I started to explore the public sector and the nonprofit sector.
And then you found your PhD program.
Yeah, and I think sort of interwoven through all of this, right, is a couple of things. One is, I was lucky enough to grow up in a family that did a lot of outdoor. My dad was a sailor, and we spent a lot of my young life, out on the ocean, exploring these, beautiful places, going and foraging for seafood and fishing and sailing and being in just remote, beautiful places. So I had this sort of natural appreciation for the natural world. And then around this time, I'm also starting to start reading about climate change, right? There was nothing in my education about climate change, but as an adult, I start to sort of, in the, I guess, sort of late 90s, start reading about that, get even more interested in it, start getting really interested in sort of really health. I had a personal sort of health scare in my early 30s, and so started to read a lot about organic food and the sustainable food movement.
Right.
And it just sort of took me deeper and deeper down this sort of path towards sustainability.
Yeah, all these things connect.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, it is interesting. I think there is a lot of generational turnover and kind of attitudes. I mean, I remember in one of your classes, we talked about how people in the 1950s, they just thought it was the most incredible thing that now you could have easily disposable dishware. We look at them now and think they were ridiculous, but manicured families from these advertisements from 1955, and it's like, look, no dishes, you can just throw them on the ground and stuff like that. And
it was seen as an advance, right? It was seen as like making life better, and it just was that we society at that time didn't understand the sort of the negative consequences or the unintended consequences of some of those things, right?
Right. Yeah. And so your PhD program, was that the first time that you'd come to the United States when you went to Boston University?
No, I'd been here for a few years. I actually did my MBA here in Boston as well, at a school called Simmons College in Boston.
Simmons is great.
Yeah,
I know some Simmons people.
Yeah, it is a great school. And when I did my MBA there, at the time, it was the only MBA program in the world designed for women.
Oh.
And so it was a place that had been founded by two women who were graduates from Harvard Business School, and they were really interested in how do they grow the pipeline of women coming into sort of senior leadership positions in business. So it was a very different kind of business school.
Sure.
It was sort of like the non-Harvard, right?
Yeah.
And it had a lot of inherently sort of corporate social responsibility, sort of the ethics of business, the role of business in the world was sort of interwoven into that curriculum. So that has started to help shape my questioning of sort of business as usual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly there was a fair amount of intentionality in your path. Like you don't just end up at these programs and play. Like you apply for them, you select for them, you screen, and you put in effort and end up meeting some really great people, right? Like your mentor who was at the forefront of this movement, and these people with this, influential and kind of ahead of the game, women's college for MBAs and all that. It's funny now because that's how I feel. Like you have now played that role for so many people. Like it's a little bit, I'm not trying to make light of it, but like it's a little bit like Kung Fu masters, right? Like in the movies. everyone is always like, what's your style? And they can be like, my style was this master and he was taught by this master. Like there's a lineage, right? And you have a lineage of, I mean, having been a teacher and a mentor to thousands of students over your career. And you were a mentee once to some faculty in, your program and in your MBA,
and I still am.
And you still am, right?
I'm still learning, and I still have people who are my mentors and helping me. But yeah, no, it was a very intentional decision. I after my, as I think I was saying, after my MBA, I kind of got sucked back into sort of full force business, into this very interesting, kind of fast growing, highly successful internet company.
Yeah.
Which was nothing about, how do we use business as a force for good. It was just sort of full on. And, I did it because I was super interested in the emergence of this new medium, right? When I worked at Ogilvy and Mather in London in the late 1980s, there were still people working there at the time who were probably in their 60s, but they'd been around at the birth of commercial television and commercial radio, right? And I, remember hearing their stories of like what it was like to be part of the birth of a whole new medium.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was just super interested in, as I saw the internet just starting to sort of open up, I'm like, wow, I could be part of building that new medium, right?
Yeah.
So that was sort of why I got sucked into the internet. But, when I came out of that company after 3 or 4 years, I was lucky that I was in a position to just say, I'm just going to take a pause. So this was, I was in my early to mid 30s and just said, I'm lucky enough that I can just take a whole year. And so I just quit my job. I took a year off. Luckily, my husband was in the same position, and we took a year off together. And it really allowed us to just think about kind of mid-career, like what is it we want to really do? Like what do we care about? What do we value? What's the impact we want to have in the world? And it sounds kind of a little... I don't know, crazy, but
No.
But it's rare that you have that, right? Because you're just running, you're earning money, you're paying your bills, you don't have a lot of time for reflection, and it was really a gift to be able to have that time just to reflect on, like, all right, I'm 35 now. Hopefully, I've got another 35 years of kind of
very long time.
like what do I want to do with that, right? And so it was during that time that I just did a lot of conversations with people that I admired, and two of them completely independently said to me, hey, have you thought about being a teacher? You'd be a great teacher. And I was like, you're crazy. I'm not a teacher. But the more I thought about it, I'd done some guest lecturing back at my alma mater, and, I knew I wasn't going to be a K through 12 teacher, but then this idea of like really helping sort of educate the next generation of business leaders started to emerge in my head. And that's why I ended up going back and getting a PhD. And, if I look back at my application to my PhD program now, it's all about, like, I want to sort of help shape the future of education.
Yeah.
Particularly secondary education.
Wow. And you never saw yourself as an educator until two people you knew really well and trusted said it to you. That's right?
Completely, exactly. Yeah, it like never occurred to me that I would be a teacher, until I was in my early mid-30s, yeah.
Huh. So in your year off, did you sail at all?
Yeah, I did some sailing and some kayaking and some hiking.
Did you ever teach someone to sail?
No.
No?
No, I don't know if I could. Could I do that? I don't know.
Of course you could.
Yeah, but I do love, it turns out I do love to teach, right? But I think you have to know what it is that you can teach about.
Right.
And I think, being a good teacher, a lot of it comes from passion.
Yeah.
And being passionate about a topic and, really understanding a topic. And so, for me, being able to teach around, this idea of like, how do we take all the things, that are really great, about capitalism. Right. But also, while at the same time, protecting ourselves from all of the sort of some of the negative things about capitalism. Right. And so, having had the chance to study that and spend like 4 or 5 years in a PhD program, like, studying that, thinking about that, then being able to come in, to an education setting and just have the passion to teach around that.
Yeah.
I can teach that.
Right.
I don't know if I could. I honestly don't know if I could teach someone how to sail, but I know I can teach someone about, how do you operate businesses for people, planet, and profit, right?
Well, this is funny because, I mean, as you know, there is another faculty member, Dr. Kim Wake, who is an avid sailor. And it's kind of like a thing with him. Like, he takes students out on the boat. I went on his boat once, and, I don't know. I feel like there's something like, if you've never gone on his boat, I feel like you could go on there and surprise him, and he might assume that you have no idea what you're doing, but you could like run the whole thing. And I'm sure I might try and extract a sailing lesson from you, even though I owe you. I'm in debt to you for being on this podcast. I've always wanted to learn how to sail.
It's not hard.
Really? It seems incredibly hard.
No, not really.
It's like speaking a different language, I don't know. I feel like if you can explain, this is what I love about your approach and the way that you tie these things together, right? So many of us we're taught that these are incompatible paths or goals, right? That you can't, if the traditional trappings of what a business is supposed to accomplish, right? However you define it, solve a problem for a marketplace, provide a good or service or a product at a price that is happy for consumers, provide value to the shareholders, right? Which are great things and great incentive structures, right? But if that's not enough, there are limitations on the problems that's a perfect vehicle for solving. I don't think it comes intuitively to a lot of people that you could bring more to that equation. They'd say, well, what's left? What do you mean you're going to talk about that floofy stuff, environmentalism, or tree hugging? What does that have to do with business? And it's hard for me you and I have been mired in this world for so long, mired's the wrong word to use, but immersed in it, that I forget that people don't think about it that way always, but you educate people on it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And and it's, I don't think it's not anyone's fault, right? I think it's that, if you look at our systems, the sort of idea of that, you can't do well and do good, that you have to somehow make a choice between, making a difference and making a profit. Those ideas are so deeply, deeply ingrained in how we teach business in business schools,
right.
How courts of law make decisions, how society views like the proper role of, what do CEOs and leaders do, right?
Yeah.
It's so deeply ingrained. And so you have to sort of think about how do you teach that in a way that people can sort of break through those assumptions.
Yeah. Now, was that something that, I guess it's a kind of thing that you had always believed, but was there a moment or an experience or a company or a class or a particular thing that you learned about that really drove this home for you, where you saw like, oh my gosh, this company they are out there doing it in a way that I never expected, or they're having such success with this counterintuitive approach? Or if there are any examples of the first time that this really clicked for you in practice, or he's like,
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, for me, it was probably like as a consumer, right? I discovered some of these companies on my own consumer journey, as I learned more about toxic persistent pesticides and, sort of things that companies would put in products, So I started, my own investigation as a consumer. And so that's when I discovered companies that were led by some of the pioneers in this movement. So people like Jeffrey Hollander, who started Seventh Generation, in terms of those, safe, healthy cleaning products. Gary Hirschberg, who started Stonyfield, largest organic yogurt company in the world, really proved that, you could be a viable, successful business by doing organic.
right.
People like, the folks behind Tom's of Maine.
Yeah.
Again, all the, Ben and Jerry's, literally Ben and Jerry, and proving that you can be this, really successful ice cream company, not despite the fact that you're doing good things for the environment, you're treating your communities and your workers well. Actually, maybe because of those things, right?
Yeah.
You're starting to be an ice cream company that is doing better than the average,
Right.
you know.
And the quality is, I mean, Ben and Jerry's is like the best ice cream that you can get at a grocery store.
Exactly.
You know, like it's just a fantastic product.
Yeah.
Another example of a company. I mean, we learned about so many in your class, but one I like to think about lately is the Dr. Bronner, the soap, kind of spiritual, preacher kind of rant that's just printed on the soap. And if you actually sit and read it, like it reads like something that would come from the 60s or something, and the entire thing is printed on it. And I don't know, I just, ever since I saw that after, taking your class and kind of thinking about it, I think to myself, like, this is a company that seems to have broken every rule of, I mean, how much do you hear about, keep your message simple and concise and all this stuff. And they just printed an entire manifesto on every bottle of soap.
No question.
And it's like the most popular soap because people, they trust that it's Dr. Bronner. It's simple.
Yeah.
It's
clear. It's not mainstream, right? It's super
Right.
successful as a company, definitely not
Yeah.
mainstream, but it's a company that, knows who it is, right? It knows what its values are. They're not willing to compromise those values. And as you say, if you took a class on marketing, you would never design packaging,
Right.
based, your marketing class would tell you to do something completely different.
Yeah.
Right. But I think it's a great example of how you don't have to follow the herd.
Right.
Right. You can be successful in different ways.
Yeah.
I think that's what this sort of movement of, conscious capitalism is really all about.
Yeah. We've heard a lot about your time in Boston, and we know that you work here at UNH, but I'm going to need a little.
Yeah.
We need some New Hampshire credentials.
Totally. Yeah. So I've been here at UNH now for about 12 or 13 years. And I've been an educator for about 20 years now. So I always think of it as my new career.
Right.
Not so new anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been here at UNH. I came as the faculty member in the business school, which is how
Right.
you and I met. And then about 5 years ago now, I was asked to take on this role at the Sustainability Institute. So I stepped out of the faculty.
Yeah.
And I now help lead the Sustainability Institute here at UNH. I'm also on the board of Revision Energy, which is a renewable energy company that's started really headquartered in Maine, but has a big presence here in New Hampshire as well.
Yeah. No, they're great. Everyone loves Revision. How have you seen, in your experience, both as an educator, right, over 20 years, or even your time here at UNH, I'd love to hear, how have you seen this kind of broader landscape change? Do you feel like the rest of society has kind of caught up or is catching up to things that your philosophy of business you've been thinking about for a while longer? Or
For sure.
are the students different? Like, tell me about your reflections on.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think students, for sure. I mean, we definitely saw, the prior generation of students, sort of later millennials, they definitely had a lot of interest in sort of what we would now call sustainability. But I think it was really this generation, Gen Z, that, full force, right? I mean, and it's not surprising, right? For Gen Zers, the climate emergency is probably,
Right.
top of the things they wake up thinking about many days, I suspect, right?
Yeah.
Issues of racial injustice, issues of economic inequality, those are the issues of Gen Z's generation. And, I mean, what I see is, both a growing awareness of those issues, right? So then that drives a desire by our students here at UNH. It's very clear they not only know about these things and they're pretty mad about these things,
Right.
but they don't want to sit on the sidelines.
Yeah.
I think more and more I'm seeing students who are like, I know there's a lot of problems in the world, but I want to be part of the solutions.
Yeah.
Help me figure out how I can do that. I think there's a huge appetite for a kind of education that's not just about theoretical knowledge, but it's really about how can I take that knowledge, that scientific basis, which is really important, but then how can my education help prepare me to be the kind of person that can go out and sort of contribute solutions and lead change?
Yeah.
So it's really nice to have seen that evolution. I think COVID was a little bit of a blip that, everyone just, had to just get through that, right? We all kind of retrenched a little bit, but I'm seeing students in the last year or so like really coming back full force and like, sign me up for all kinds of, there's no question that they still value and know they need the kind of classroom experience, right? But I think more and more students are saying, help me get out of the classroom, help me take what I've learned in the classroom and apply it in real settings and build real tangible skills.
Yeah.
Help me build my networks of other like-minded people, in the New Hampshire community, so that when I graduate, I can build a career in this space.
Yeah. Well, now you can tell them, listen to Granite Goodness.
Exactly.
Which is a solution on all your problems. No, I mean, it's like you're writing perfect lines for this podcast. Like that's exactly what I would hope and want. I mean, I've for what it's worth, I'm not an educator, but the younger folks that I interact with, and I'm 28, the same kind of attitude of, a lot of the time I think the problems can feel overwhelming to younger people. Maybe all the ways they're saturated in different ways of media and ways to get information. I don't see this kind of attitude, like you would think that would make people just feel helpless and all that. And I don't see that as much as, I don't know, I guess you would think, right? I really see people wanting to get up, at least certainly in a university environment, which is always exciting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of why I love my job. I mean, I suspect I see the people who are wanting to get involved and are willing to just say, all right, I know I can't change everything, but I want to try and do something. So I suspect, myself and my colleagues here at the Sustainability Institute, we naturally are surrounded by the students who are those optimists, who are the ones who feel like, something is better than nothing and want to get involved. But, it gives me huge optimism for our future, because I do think there's just a ton of people, of this generation who really care and, are ready to take action. They are taking action. They're doing amazing things,
Yeah. And I like thinking about this too, because we were just having this conversation. People talk a lot now about, of higher education, the value of college. And I think like a lot of people in my generation, my age, I don't think that when I went, I didn't take as much advantage of it as maybe I would have if I was like a couple of years older, right? And, there's great things about that and there's not so great. But what I am pretty convinced of unequivocally is that, if you want to go to college and you just kind of want to, coast and not really be super engaged, sure, there's probably better uses of your money and time. But if you're going to want to go and be really engaged and take advantage of all the stuff that is there to help you succeed and learn about all the things you want to do, oh my gosh, are you kidding? It is literally worth the money. And like, I mean that, I know it's a lot, but you don't really appreciate until you're out of it that it's this fantastic time. You're surrounded by thousands of people whose entire job it is to help see you succeed. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that your coworkers or your family or your friends, they don't all want the same thing for you, but it's never going to be like that ever again. Everyone in a university environment, especially UNH. Again, I'm biased, but I love it. And they do a great job. Like they are all there to see you succeed.
Yeah, and I think that that sort of speaks to sort of a couple of things that we've been really working on over the last 5 years here, right, at the Sustainability Institute, which is, one is, I don't remember if we did this in the class where the class you took with me, Andy, but more and more I started asking this question of people about like, what matters to you? What's the impact you want to have in the world? And I kept having students say to me, wow, like no one's ever asked me that question before in college. Huh. And I thought, like we all assume somebody else is asking students that question.
Right.
We all assume somebody else is helping students figure out that question. And so, I became pretty convinced like 6 or 7 years ago that, a big part of our job as educators is to really help students navigate those questions of like, what is the, unique contribution I can have in the world? What is it I really care about? What do I want to build my career around? Yes, we've got to make money. We all need to make money to provide for ourselves and our families. But life's too short, right, to do work that isn't meaningful to you. And so how do we help students really figure out where kind of, their unique skills, the things they value and care about, where do those collide with kind of the needs of the world, right? Where can they kind of find a job and, build a good livelihood, And so the brilliance is when those three things come together, right? You can do a job that you're genuinely good at, you have unique skills in. It's about something you care passionately about, but it's also about where there are opportunities.
Right.
So, doing that I think is really important. So some of the programs that we run here at the Sustainability Institute, particularly our first year programs, we have a program called the Changemaker Fellowship that we launched a few years ago. And, a big part of that is about helping students navigate those questions.
Right.
But then it's also about helping them think about like how do I get the most out of my 4 years here at the university, right? And we really focused on we have wonderful colleagues in the colleges across UNH, right? Those are really good, experiences to help students really kind of build depth in their discipline,
right.
Whether they're engineers or liberal arts students or business students, right? They're getting that, deep expertise in their content area, where, in their colleges. But what we're trying to do here at the Sustainability Institute, it's all part of, UNH's larger plan to really help students get out of the classroom, get out of their comfort zone, get out of the context they know, and just like really build some tangible, real world skills, right? What we call experiential learning or high impact learning.
Yeah.
And that's been pretty exciting to sort of really build some of those programs, because I think it's creating these transformative experiences for our students, but it's also about creating some very much needed capacity for companies and nonprofits and municipalities across New Hampshire to help them in their own journey towards more sustainable practices. So, maybe I can give an example of what we mean by that. Would that be helpful?
Oh yeah, I mean we can talk about the Fellows program. Which I think is a perfect example and a really unique thing in higher education. I mean, I was talking to Dovev Levine, who's a great, he's a friend and he's done a lot of work with the Sustainability Institute. He works for the Sustainability Institute and the graduate program, and really runs the Fellows program essentially along with a great team of people. And there really is nothing quite. There's no peer program to my knowledge. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, it's a pretty neat program. We'll have almost 50 summer sustainability fellows this summer, and they'll be out most of the time. They'll be out doing their placements, leading strategic sustainability projects for businesses and nonprofits and towns all over the region, not just New Hampshire, but the region a little bit more broadly.
Yeah.
And they're all about kind of capacity building and really helping those organizations, and sustainability is a very, very broad tent. So some of those people will be working on projects to reduce greenhouse gas measure and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Some of those people will be working on projects to do with equity and inclusion. It's a very broad set of projects, but it's a really cool program. We will have, like I said, almost 50 students, over almost 50 host organizations, and we'll bring all those people together at least once during the summer, for this incredible sort of collaborative network building session. But there's real work being done, right? I mean, we live in a time when there's real important, urgent work to be done. And the summer sustainability fellows, can't do all of that. But we hope we're making, a good dent in some of that by having, now 50 fellows this summer out across the state and across the region doing some of that important work.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible number. I mean, when I first heard that, it still is shocking to me. I mean, because the program is not that old. It's like a decade old. You know,
Well,
just
it's
about that?
existed in various iterations.
Right, there was
a
a
little bit
merger.
longer.
Yeah.
But it's been we've intentionally grown it over the last few years because of our role as we're a public university,
Right.
and anybody who ever kind of goes back and sort of reads what does it mean to be a land grant university, what does it mean to be a public institution of higher education. I've read some of those things over the years, and it's part of why I work here. I want to work for a public university.
Right.
I think at this moment in time, that is something that feels right to me. And this idea of like the public good is deeply ingrained in the mission of UNH.
Right.
And so when we think about what does the public good mean today in 2024, and we think about these big, humongous, complex sustainability challenges we face as a society, I think that's a role that universities I would argue, should play, right? Like, we are, as higher education institutions, really well equipped to sort of contribute on a couple of levels. One is, we have faculty, right? Part of what universities do, and our faculty, they are, producing new knowledge and new insights, right, to really help bring solutions to some of these big issues. Mm-hmm. But we're also, an educational institution. So part of what we do is we graduate, hopefully, hundreds and thousands of, young people who come out into their careers, into the workplace with the tools and the skills and the mindsets that they need to be people who can bring problem solving to some of these big issues.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I'd say, and then I think, universities also can be really powerful role models, right? We haven't really talked a lot about UNH's own sustainability practices, but, we're really proud. We're sort of one of the top 10 universities in the country for how we operate this university as a sustainable campus. And that's important. We're a community. When we've got faculty, staff, and students here, it's about 20,000 people. That's the same size as Portsmouth, New Hampshire, right? So we try and act as a role model, and also just be a valued partner and a resource to organizations across the state, so that we can learn from them, but they can also hopefully learn from us, and we can help them in their own sustainability journeys.
I'm glad. I mean, I was going to ask about this because, this whole thing, Fiona, it's a little bit of a Trojan horse, and I'm just going to come out and say it to the listeners, right? Some people, we're New Hampshire people, so we understand. What is kind of fun about the conceit of this podcast, right, is that people who aren't from or around New Hampshire, I don't know, they might end up listening to it by accident, and they might have this idea that, oh, New Hampshire, like, what is that? Like I would travel to other states as a teenager sometimes, and I'd meet other kids from other states, and it's, oh, where are you from? Texas, California. And then I'd say I'm from New Hampshire, and they would say, what state is that in? And so it does kind of have this weird reputation. I'm not going to say backwater because that's a mean thing to say, but I think a lot of people underestimate New Hampshire, right, because of our size and other things. And of course, what we know is that it is actually, we're not just this like random podunk New England state on the border of Canada. Like, we're actually one of the most innovative, forward-thinking, incredible places for pick your issue, but particularly sustainability. Our land grant public university, UNH, is, as you said, one of the certainly leaders in the country, if not the world, for the way it's run and all of its operations, and that's not a mistake. That it doesn't just happen. This was a very deliberate decision from a couple really smart people in the 90s got together and helped make all this happen.
Yeah, and a couple of, and a really, really forward-looking alum of UNH who sort of donated money to the UNH was one of the first universities in the country to have a university-wide sustainability institute. Right. That has really enabled us to sort of do this work in a really consistent way now over 2.5 decades, right? Yeah. It doesn't just happen overnight. You can't just sort of I mean, I guess if you have enough money, you can sort of do it, faster.
Yeah, but the expertise doesn't.
But the expertise doesn't come overnight.
There's
right?
only one
Right.
Allie Leach, and we
Right.
both know that.
Yeah.
She is a fantastic researcher with the Sustainability Institute, who really helped pioneer how do you measure the impact of nitrogen pollution anywhere, right?
Exactly.
I
And her and also my colleague Jen Andrews, they are probably two of the people that know more about how do you measure greenhouse gas emissions for an organization than anyone else I know. And and that work was supported and nurtured here at UNH. And it now means that UNH is sort of one of the leading institutions in the country, in the world for we have a software platform called SciMap, which is
The Sustainability Indicator Management and Analysis Platform.
very good. You're one of the few people that know what the acronym
Well,
stands for.
I used to work.
I know you did.
I mean, I'm not trying to betray, my thing, but yeah, for the listeners, if you worked in a college sustainability office, or you ever have tried to calculate the greenhouse gas footprint of a college, or anywhere in higher education, pretty much anywhere in the United States at any time in the last 20 years, and I'm not exaggerating, you've probably used either the campus carbon calculator or the new kind of slick online version of that, which is SciMap, and that's UNH intellectual property. And it's fantastic, but it's like no one would know that. You wouldn't know that you used essentially a UNH innovation, and which came about because we are this nexus, right, for sustainability and all these things for a bunch of different people. But the campus carbon calculator was it's no joke. It was like
it was developed because there was nothing else. UNH was one of the first universities to start measuring and reporting our carbon emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions on an annual basis. And when we started doing that, and when I say we, I wasn't even here, right? But
yeah, I wasn't
but there was no tool to do that, and that was part of why what is now SciMap got developed in the first place, and it's part of why we continue to operate it for public good. So it's now a piece of software and with a very robust research program that backs that up.
Right.
That we license that now to over 500 other universities, but also municipalities and nonprofits. It fulfills a pretty unique place in the market, that it's very rigorous, it's research driven, but it's very, very affordable. We deliberately make it affordable for universities, schools, hospitals, other entities like that. And I think what's really cool about that now is that we're starting to really think about how do we use that for education, and how do we use that for kind of even greater impact in the community. So we have an online carbon footprinting certificate. So we're teaching professionals. My colleagues Jen Andrews and Allie Leach are teaching professionals, how to do greenhouse gas emission measurement. But we're also using it to teach current students. So through a fairly new program, it's just about 2 years old. It's called the Climate Action Clinic. We're teaching students kind of the science and the knowledge to how to do a greenhouse gas inventory for an organization.
Yeah.
And then we match them with a small company, a large company, a municipality in the region. And those students with faculty guidance really help that organization, often for the very first time, measure their greenhouse gas emissions and develop a climate action plan for how they can reduce that. So that's one of the examples of those programs I was talking about that really are about transformative education for our students. We're graduating students that have that on their resume, very specific skills that is really helping them get a leg up in the job market.
Right.
But we're also really giving some really needed kind of help and capacity to organizations in the Granite State who want to start measuring their own carbon emissions and start reducing them.
There's so much to love there, right? The practical experience, you're solving problems, you're exposing students to research and real world stuff. And this is a personal thing for me. Like the certificate wasn't around when I was a student, but I used to be an intern here at the Sustainability Institute, and this was one of, I mean, I would definitely say a formative experience for me, because it exposed me to this whole world of carbon accounting, right? Greenhouse gas accounting and emissions science. And the amount of thought that goes into it is just astounding. I love thinking about that, particularly as a kind of educational example or footprint, right? We can make some greenhouse gas puns here, because it's the sort of thing that feels like, this is the challenge of climate, right? It feels so abstract to so many people. You plug your thing in, use electricity, you put gas in your car, and it's all very theoretical and abstract. It's hard to quantify what is this going to do to the climate over a 50, 40, 20, 10-year period, et cetera, right? But learning about the calculations behind greenhouse gases, and then that turned me on to all the other data, right? Like, I'm going to say it in a simple way. Sustainability is digging through trash, Like, it's not, we were just talking about this. It's off. I mean, it is super interesting and fascinating, and you get really into it, and you talk to any of these people and they'll explain why they devoted their lives to it. But at the outset of it, it's not a particularly sexy thing to learn about, right? Of, hey, the EPA has updated its standards for diesel trucks that are going to be bought by the government, or they need to update the fuel efficiency, and go and update the emissions factor in this database so that this calculation in the platform can be correct, right? Like, you wouldn't think that was groundbreaking, pertinent, important work, but it kind of is, because it is all kind of that way. And that was a huge lesson for me, was meeting people like Jen, like Allie, who, like so many people who I'm hopefully going to have more on this podcast, they're just plunking away at these problems, you know. You may not see them on the front page every day, but Jen has devoted so much time to trying to get the stuff right.
Well, I think that speaks to, sort of one of the sort of, maybe something we haven't spoken about is like, what is sustainability and what really matters. And, there's so much greenwashing out there, right? Which is sort of, the term we use when people are sort of saying good things, but actually it's not really actually followed through in the practice. And so I think, as a university, we're not perfect, right? We are far from perfect from a sustainability standpoint, but we try and be transparent about kind of where we are in our journey. Right. There's things that we don't do well. There's lots of things we do really well, and there's some things that we know we still have a long way to go. But we try and be, number one, transparent about where those things are. We try and have those things be learning opportunities, whether it's for faculty research or it's for a student. We have 25 interns, they're the people who have followed in your footsteps, Andy. We have 25 interns at the Institute this year, and they're all spending, 8 to 10 hours a week working not just with faculty and staff here at the Institute, but with staff all over campus, thinking about UNH's trash and our waste systems, and thinking about wastewater, and thinking about landscapes and pollinator gardens, right? We're trying to sort of have the things we're not doing well, we're trying to have them be learning experiences and for all of us. But the third thing is you have to have rigor behind it, right? You have to measure it, and you have to be able to sort of make decisions based on rigorous data, not just on sort of whims. And so, things like measuring our greenhouse gas emissions, that allows us to give real rigor. You can't change what you don't measure. And so, measuring in a way that is comprehensive and rigorous is I think part of, doing sustainability well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's certainly something that I think, lay people who don't know, or they haven't studied it, or they may not understand the amount of thought that's been put into all of this stuff. And I really love that you leading with transparency, right? And using these things as a learning opportunity. I mean, I can't think of a better way to try and turn students on to a lot of the stuff, right? Because, they may be asked, all right, try and go get the data from this department, and then, plug it into the calculator, make sure the things you're using to calculate it and tabulate are correct and all that. And they might not do that and say, man, this is exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life. But in doing that, I mean, there's so many lessons. There's so many great lessons about like idealism and practicality, what's possible versus what we're doing right now. And do you want to stay on the sidelines or do you want to get involved, right? I don't know how you can fault someone. Like if you say, man, I don't know why we're not 100% renewable or whatever, pick your criteria. And it's like, all right, well, come find out. We're trying to figure it out too. Mm-hmm. Come get involved.
Exactly.
And that you have been so intentional and transparent, right, about helping students find opportunities to not just learn these things, but, literally participate in the operation of the university, right? I mean, how many students work at the dining halls, drive the buses, do parking? Like it's all, it feels like a real learning laboratory.
Yeah, I mean, we think of that. We often use the word, the sort of campus as a living learning laboratory, right?
Yeah.
For sustainability, and I think that's right. And at the end of the day, I think the world needs, millions and millions of capable, courageous change makers, right? And that is one of the things that we as an educational institution can do. It's kind of what makes me really passionate about the work we do here. And, it's building that sense of agency that, somebody graduating from UNH, that they perceive they not only have the tangible skills that they need, but they also have the confidence to believe that they can affect change, and so we really try and work on both of those things through our programs here, building both that sense of, we often use the word courage, because it does take courage. These are big, complex, issues. And so you definitely need some tangible skill, but you also need the sort of the courage and the confidence to be able to sort of implement those skills.
Yeah. And dare I say, the optimism.
Yeah.
It's a little arrogant to think you can change the world, but if you don't think it, then why try?
Or if you think you can't, you definitely won't.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Right. So at least have the optimism that you can, and then let's see what good things happen.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a ton of, emerging research about, I've been reading a lot about climate anxiety and climate depression, which, which is a huge thing, and, understandably so. But, if you read some of the research about the best ways to sort of combat that, it's having a sense of agency that there are things I can do.
Right.
And being involved in sort of things that are focused on making things better, even if it's not solving the whole thing. It's like I'm having a positive impact in this one area,
right,
and doing it with like-minded people, and believing that there are viable solutions out there. Those are the things that we need, because if we don't have those things, it's game over, right? It's tough, and we've got a lot to work on, but having belief that there are other people like me that want to do this stuff, and that there are viable solutions that we can collectively work on, unless we have that belief, we don't get anywhere, right?
Right. Well, and there was a moment, I can't say exactly when, but in my adult life after graduating college, when it clicked for me how, this is going to sound like cheesy, but really how important the role of educators is. I mean, really, like all these things we're talking about, agency and courage and a belief to learn about different things and try them, and this is a thing that I went through and kind of snapped out of. A lot of young people, I think they go through life and they feel, it's not their fault, but they feel like they're just a bystander, right, to all the things that they feel like are happening around them. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes no one is ever asking them these questions of, hey, what's important to you? What kind of impact do you want to have? Who have you talked to? What do you think about all the time, right?
What are your special skills?
What can you
contribute? Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Right. And this simplicity, and it's incredibly complex, but like this simple kind of notion of, you get to go in, all the time and speak to young people and say, you're not a bystander, this is real, but you can do something, right? And you're not alone. There are so many people. It's like, this is why I'm doing this podcast. There are so many people, who, there's going to be 1,000 episodes here, hopefully one day, right? That you don't hear about them, right? They're out there in the background. They're doing the good work. Folks like you, right? And they're doing it for a long time. And like, that's the only way anything ever gets better. It's not sexy. It doesn't happen overnight, but, preaching lessons and principles of optimism and pragmatism to generation after generation for 20 years, that's a big deal, Fiona. I think it's a big deal. And I think you're great at it. And, again, I'm biased because I'm one of your acolytes, but I wear that badge with pride.
Oh, thank you. It's I feel very lucky to, have a career that I genuinely wake up every day excited to do, and, be surrounded by, these brilliant, amazing, creative young people, who are fighting for a better tomorrow. What better way to, earn my living? And,
yeah.
It's an honor and it's a privilege to do this work, and I love it. So, yeah, thanks for letting me talk about it.
Of course. I know. I just checked. We've been going for like an hour and 8 minutes, which is insane. Well, thank you very much, Fiona. You're an inspiration, and lucky to have met you and to have had you as a mentor. And hopefully we'll do this again, and I can say you're my 101st guest on Granite Goodness. You're my 3rd, but it's so exciting. Yeah, keep up the good work.
Yeah, thank you. It's been such an honor and such a pleasure to sit down and talk to you. And you're an inspiration to me, right? It's so fun to see all the things that you're doing in your life and your career. X many years after graduating.
Yeah.
So super fun to have met this young person in my class who was talking about saving the orangutans, and to see how that idea is still, you've still got the orangutan on your computer, but
he's always with us.
He's always with us. But, I love seeing how that sort of more general sense of wanting to save the world and save the orangutans has kind of morphed into a very specific career path for you.
Yeah.
Which is so exciting.
It's all related. It's all sustainability,
Exactly.
Right? Well, it's funny. The first episode was with Ian, right, who's all about entrepreneurship. And we came away thinking it's all entrepreneurship. And then I talked to Allison, who did New Hampshire civics, and, she made a very compelling argument. It's all civics. Everything is civics, And of course, I'm with you, and this is my bias territory. It's all sustainability. Gosh, well, always fun to talk to you. We'll talk again, and keep up the great work. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Hey there. Thanks for spending some time with us, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. You can learn more about today's guest and how to get involved with or support their work in the show notes. If you'd like to suggest a guest for the show or have any story tips for our Good News in New Hampshire newsletter, shoot me a message at hello@granitegoodness.com. Music for this episode was provided by the band Sneaky Miles, who hail from Newmarket, New Hampshire. Until next time, I'm the creator of Granite Goodness and the host of the Granite Goodness podcast, Andy DeMeo. Thanks for listening.